Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Dharma Breeze. It's nice to see all of you here. I'd like to start with a short silent meditation. So if you could sit firmly in your chair with your back straight, your feet flat on the floor, and your shoulders relaxed. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, namadats. Okay, so if everybody could please join me in chanting the Juni Rai together. Excuse me, the Jusei. I'm sorry. Michael and I always do that together, don't we? 가곤 조세간 이시무조도 이산 불만족 세프 조쇼각 가오 무료코 Vui Dai Se Shu Busai Shobingu Sefu Joshogak Gashi Jobutsudo Myosho Chojipo 극교 미쇼몬 세프 조쇼각 리역 진쇼넨 조에 슈번교 시그무조도 이쇼 텐닌시 진니키 엔다이코 부쇼 무사이도 쇼조 상크묘 고사이 슈야크난 가히 지에겐 메시코모안 해석 쇼아크도 스다츠 젠슈몬 고소조만족 이어로지포 니치가스 슈즈키 텐코 온프겐 이슈 가이호조 고세 그도크호 上大衆住、説法ししく、供養一切仏、具足修徳本、元年出場満、得意三害を、如仏無下知、通達未不詳、願学へ力、投資最小尊、志願若か、大仙を感動、国書天人、東鎮妙慶、ナマダム、ナマダム、ナマダム、ナマダム、ナマダム、ナマダム、がんにしくどく、平等正祭、同壺大神、往生安楽国。Namadots, namadots, 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 namadots. So this evening, I'd like to start with a passage. So if you could please join me in Gasho. These days, as in the past, it seems that many of those who call themselves followers of the Buddha Dharma and extol and proclaim the teachings in various places and provinces are themselves not truly grounded in the right teaching of our tradition. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadots, namadots. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to make a confession. We're having the Eastern Buddhist League conference this weekend, and I am going to be leaving New York City tomorrow morning to go down to Virginia. So I've been insanely busy. And one of the things about the aging process is that those sticky notes in your mind where you've got all these things listed of what you're supposed to do, it doesn't work quite as well as it used to. And so I've been a little scattered. Today was a very busy day. We had Asaji. For those that are familiar with the Jodo Shinshu tradition, that some temples will chant the Shoshin on the 16th of every month, which is honoring the day that Shinran Shonin passed. And I'm very fortunate here at New York because we have some new people that are wanting to become ministers' assistants. So not only are we chanting the Shoshin together, it's almost like a class with them asking lots of questions. And that kind of leads to what we're going to be doing tonight. One of the things that they were asking me this morning, and the words that I just read are not from Shinran Shonin, is they were talking about doctrine and how important is doctrine. And one of the MAs is very, very sincere. Do I have to understand everything that I'm chanting in the sutras? And so we had a very healthy discussion going about understanding what is in the sutra, but also to appreciate it as a form of ritual and practice. And we had a very good conversation. So then this afternoon, I was sitting down and I was reading through what I read to us was from the Gubunsho, which are the letters of Renyo Shonin. And he is the eighth master of our tradition, actually a descendant of Shinran Shonin, who lived over 500 years ago. And one of the disadvantages for those that are participating in the Zoom sessions after they've been recorded is you don't get to participate in our wonderful discussion groups. So even, like Joe, who regularly attends, we had a great discussion last week about karma and intention. And so I came across this letter that addresses that today. One of the things that I appreciate about having all of these writings from both Shinran and Renyo and the Seven Pure Land Masters in English, which is accessible, is that sometimes, especially when it's written in a letter, it makes you understand the humanity of our founders, of our leaders, that they're not these completely idealistic people that did not have emotions or did not have attachments. They definitely do. And we'll be talking about the letters of Renyo here, which sometimes maybe to our modern sensitivity, he seems very critical, because the letter that I'm going to be talking about today are two basic concepts in it. I read the very first part of the paragraph where he talks about people being deluded, basically thinking that they're good Buddhists or good Shin Buddhists. And we'll talk about that in a little more in depth. But more importantly, and I'm glad that Eric is here because he was asking really good questions about karma. If somebody does something, we discussed in the discussion group last week, if someone does something in this life that's very horrendous, like killing somebody or a mass murder, why are they reborn in the Pure Land? Why are they assured that process? And so today, this is kind of addressing that from the words of Renyo. And again, in the discussion group, we can talk about the nuances if this makes sense to us. Now, one of the things is that the Gubunsho, as many of you know, at the early point of when Renyo Shonin was alive, the institutional side, the organizational side of Shinshu was still relatively primitive. I've discussed in previous Dharma talks that even in the first couple hundred years after our founder Shinran Shonin passed, those monks that were in the temples that were Jodo Shinshu were Tendai monks. It wasn't until a few centuries after his passing that we started having these Jodo Shinshu temples where the ordination platform is what they call it in English, because the Japanese government would control how many Buddhist monks were ordained every year. So many Zen, so many Jodo Shinshu. And so for the first couple hundred years, there wasn't a specific Jodo Shinshu. So at the time of Renyo, when you would go to Japan, probably there were not a lot of what we would think of as established traditional temples. There are a lot of what they call dojos. Many of us are familiar with that terminology, like with martial arts like karate or judo, that dojo is a meeting place. And interestingly, in our history of Shin Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu in Japan, many of these gatherings, there was no one that was ordained, and they would have a lay leader, and they would conduct a service, they would have discussion groups, and then the tradition came where they would ask specific questions in a letter form and send it to the head temple in Kyoto, the Honganji, and Renyo would answer them. And we have hundreds of these letters, which is fascinating because some of it might seem irrelevant to our modern sensitivities because they're asking questions about that time or specifically about how the Japanese society was at that time. But the letters do reflect a very personal aspect of Shinran and Renyo and how he is trying to keep the organization and having our founder Shinran Shonin's teachings continue. I know that Joe has mentioned it before, but at the Seattle Betsuin in the 1940s and the 1950s, the Japanese members were actually translating the Gubunsho. At that point, it hadn't been widely translated into English. So they had all of these rough manuscripts that had been sitting in the downstairs, which I hope didn't get destroyed in the fire, Joe. Probably did. And so we had all these rough drafts. And so when I was there in the early 90s, Reverend Iwahara was wanting us to make them into more readable English. And so we didn't get very far, but selfishly, I got to spend time with Reverend Iwahara, who's very dedicated Shin Buddhist, very traditional Jodo Shin Buddhist minister. And I said, because there's like Renyo is almost sarcastic in some of these letters, like, oh, these people, they don't know what they're talking about. And there was one letter that just blew me away because he's talking about to the people that are behind the shoji or the folding doors. I'm like, well, what is he talking about? He goes, because the maids are listening in and I want them to hear this teaching as well. Also, there's letters where he talks about, why are these people coming to the temple? Why are they coming to see me? They don't seem to have any direction. And again, I said to Iwahara Sensei, I said, wow, this seems so negative. And he goes, no, this is the way that he was trying to create that foundation of people understanding what Jodo Shinshu is. So the letter tonight, and I will be reading more than I normally do, but again, like my mind is not in the most focused right now after everything getting ready for the EBL. But I think it's very important because it does talk about the idea of what people are sometimes egotistical about their understanding of the Dharma. Now, one of the things before I read this is we have to look at it also from a historical perspective, that at this point, sometimes people will say, why was our organization split in half? Why is there an Eastern Jodo Shinshu and a Western? We're Nishi, the Western, and there's also Higashi. Why was that divided up? Well, our forefathers weren't necessarily the most peaceful people, and the peasants could be talked into arms. There's records of like over 10,000 Jodo Shinshu followers going into another province to protest or to fight for the shogun or for other lords. And so the Japanese powers that be, the government said, we need to break this group up. They're too powerful. And so that's a realistic thing. So at that time, when you're hearing these letters, Renyo is like saying, some of the letters say, you know, you could be proud about being a Shin Buddhist, but don't put other traditions down. All forms of Buddhism are valid. Everybody can reach enlightenment in their various ways. This form is good, but please, in public, because one of the heresies that was in Japan, probably until the time of Renyo, is that sometimes the Pure Land Buddhists were very egotistical and say, we have the best form of Buddhism. You don't need to do all those practices. You don't need to do meditation. And so all the other traditional schools did not like hearing this. Other people in the community didn't like hearing this. And as many of you know, that the key people, including Shinran Shonin and Honin Shonin, were sent into exile and excommunicated or defrocked because the Japanese government didn't like the followers going around and bragging and saying that we have the superior form of Buddhism. So the first part of this letter addresses that, and I like to read it. And again, I'm sorry I'm reading about so much, but I think it's very important because this is from Renyo Shonin. One of the other things before I read it is that what's interesting to me, and which I learned at the Institute of Buddhist Studies, is that when Renyo did this form of Buddhism, he took words like didn't use Shinjin as much, he used Anjin, which has a different nuance, and he was talking much more less philosophical, a lot less doctrinal than Shinran Shonin did. And so for those centuries after his death until the modern era, the Meiji era, which is, you know, around 1860 on, they were following Renyo. There was this huge change within Honzan, our head temple, where they said, well, we have the source. Let's go back to Shinran Shonin. And again, part of that was in rebuttal to the Japanese government being concerned about Renyo, his style. So when we, from our modern perspective, everything is from Shinran. We have the collected works of Shinran, and Renyo is not as well emphasized. I was incredibly fortunate. I was in Japan for Renyo's 500th anniversary, and they lamented that it was not as big a celebration as it would have been 100 years before, because now the emphasis is on Shinran. But when I read this, I think you'll get to pick up the much more character of Renyo. And of course, these are letters. The Kyogyo Shinsho that Shinran wrote, he did write letters as well, but the Kyogyo Shinsho is doctrinal. He's writing down his understanding of different Buddhist passages, the different understanding of the Pure Land masters, and was trying to write that in a very loose form. So this is a letter that was sent to the everyday person in Japan. And again, I'll reread it. So the first part of the letter is reflecting upon people's ego attachments, thinking that they know more about the Dharma, specifically Jodo Shinshu, than maybe they do. And we can all smile because I think we can realize that in ourselves and maybe some of our fellow members of the Sanghas that we've been present in. So it says, these days, as in the past, it seems that many of those who call themselves followers of the Buddha Dharma and extol and proclaim teachings in various places and provinces are themselves not truly grounded in the right teaching of our tradition. Now, he's chosen his words very carefully because he's actually saying that there is a misunderstanding or there is a wrong interpretation of the Shin teachings. When we ask the reason for this, in the first place, although they act as if they know the Dharma in depth, Not part, no, excuse me, no part of their understanding has been gained from authentic sources. Some have heard the teachings quite by chance from the edge of a porch or from the outside of a sliding door. Their aspiration for the appreciation for the Buddha Dharma and truth is shallow, and they think that there is no one that knows better than they do what the Buddha Dharma is all about. Consequently, they happen to see people who proclaim our traditions' right teachings in the correct manner. They cling persistently to their own shallow views. It is not, in the first place, arrogantly for them to immediately assume that only they know the full teachings. So again, so he's starting off this letter talking about, and as I've said in other letters, he emphasizes people's attachments to the teachings. Also, I think looking at this from a historical perspective, he's also talking about people maybe hearing something from somebody that doesn't, someone from another village that doesn't have a clear understanding of what they heard, or these dojos might have conflicting views of what they were teaching. This is one of the reasons for the Gubuncho, as these letters are still read in Japan every day for over 500 years. And this is also with Renyo, making our liturgy standardized, introducing the Shoshinge as a chant, de-emphasizing the Tendai Pure Land chants. And so what he's trying to do is he's trying to say, that there is a true teaching, and it is getting diluted, and it's part of my responsibility to make sure that people understand that there is a true teaching. And I love it. This is his personality. He goes, in this frame of mind, they wander from place to place among followers of our tradition and read scriptures. And in addition to that, they simply integrate themselves with people, making up lies and take things from them, saying that they were sent from the head temple, and that when in truth they're following their own personal matters. How can these people be called good followers of Buddha Dharma or readers of scripture? This is utterly deplorable. I don't think Shinran would say that. It is one thing we should lament above all else. Those who want to present our traditions, teachings, and instruct others must therefore, first of all, be fully aware of the steps in instruction. So very strong words. So again, this is part of the letter tonight. We're gonna be maybe focusing on the second part. Oh my goodness, I'm running out of time. But the idea is that Renyo is discussing about our own ego attachment here. And I think what he's trying to say is that, and we all know that people, whether they are educated or their opinion, that we'll talk about the Dharma. So one of the things that we're instructed as Jodo Shinshu ministers, is that when people come up and they say, well, I believe that Amida Buddha, or let's say they make a stance, they say that Amida Buddha is a true being, that the Pure Land is a physical place. So we've been instructed is that what we do is you engage the person. You say, well, why do you believe that? And then the idea is not to say that you're wrong, and to have that person process that. And then the idea is then as a minister representing the teachings and being ordained, if someone says, well, do you believe that the Pure Land's a place? And I would say, no, my doctrinal understanding is that it is not a place. So, kind of looking back on the ideas of Renyo is that, that as part of what we do, and we take our vow. So Eric has Tokudo level ordination. You only get ordained once in Jodo Shinshu. I have Kyoshi, and Kyoshi is an educational certification. And so when we receive Tokudo, as I've said before, you say that you can no longer sit in the back row, that you have to, constantly be trying to propagate the teachings and help others. And then when you do the Kyoshi certification, what you're doing is you're telling that you're trying to teach the authentic, true understanding of Shinran's words. So it has a little bit of a different emphasis. And that doesn't mean that I know everything, but the idea is that the person represents and then tries to come in and align with what is the proper understanding. So we can talk about this in the discussion group. Unfortunately, that won't be recorded for the other people. But I'd like to quickly go into this because, like I said, Eric was talking about this last week. And this is a very interesting concept. And this is talking about the idea of goodness from a past life. We were talking about the idea of reincarnation last night, whether it was being literal, as in that I'm reborn into a physical form, or I come back as an animal the next life. And here is an interesting description from Renyo. He goes, when we consider presenting our tradition's other power faith, We must distinguish between people who have good from the past and those who lack good from the past. For however long a person may have listed his name as participating in our tradition, it will be difficult for one who lacks the good from a path to attain faith. Indeed, faith, and then they have in parentheses Shin, will of itself be decisively settled for the person whose past good has unfolded. And so when we discuss the two kinds of practice, right and sundry, correct and incorrect, in the presence of these people who lack good from the past, they may lay the foundations for slander, contrary to what they would expect. To teach the presence of ordinary people without understanding this principle of presence or absence of good from the past is total opposition to our tradition's rules of conduct. Okay, so that's a lot to absorb. So here he's saying very concretely that the idea is that there has to be this good past, or there has to be a foundation. And maybe, again, I'm jealous of my Japanese counterparts, which could see the kanji in the word right might be in the sense of Buddhist right, like right path, right view. That's how I would interpret it here from the English. So it says, hence in the larger sutra, the person who lacks, this is a quote, if a person lacks roots of good, he will not be able to hear the sutra. And to hear the sutra is to sustain faith, or shingyo, are the most difficult of all difficulties. Nothing surpasses these difficulties. Also, Shantao states, if a person has already practiced this Dharma at one time in the past and is able to hear it again, he will immediately realize joy. So here they're talking about there is a disposition about whether you're able to hear. For example, it says specifically in the sutra, if you do not have these roots, then it would be difficult for you to hear that. If you have those roots, if you've had that kind of experience, then you would be able to hear. So I think this ties in very closely to what we discussed last week, and I think it'll be good for us to discuss this because the idea, and like I said, with the English as opposed to the original Japanese or the Chinese, the idea of what good is I believe, like in true practice. And so the idea is that if we have the understanding, then we're more able or more open to understand the true meaning of the sutras and the teachings. And I'll just finish with the last paragraph. In particular, first of all, take the laws of the state of fundamentalism and giving priority to the principles of humanity and justice. Again, this is referring to Renyo, referring to the government. Follow the general accepted customs deep within yourself, maintain the settled mind of our tradition, and outwardly conduct yourself in such a way as that the transmission of the Dharma you have received will not be evident by those others of other schools and sects. This distinguishes the person who fully knows our tradition's rights, teachings, which is true and real. So again, you can see why Renyo's writings are so important, but also a little controversial. So when we have this conversation, I would like to open it up and hear what your views are on that. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to conclude with a group reading. So if you could please join me in reading our pledge, which was sent out to you. Breaking out of my shell, I will share a warm smile and speak gentle words, just like the kind Buddha. Not becoming lost in my greed, anger, and ignorance, I shall think and act with an open mind, just like the calm and peaceful Buddha. Not putting myself first, I will share in the joy and sadness of others, just like the compassionate Buddha. Realizing the gift of life I have received, I shall strive to live each day to its fullest, like the Buddha who tirelessly works to liberate all. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Dats. Okay, so if everybody could please join me in another quick silent meditation. So if you could please sit in your chair, feet firm on the floor, your back straight, and your shoulders relaxed. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, namadats.